check this. Right, that appears to be working. Hi guys, welcome to what is, I think, the second to last night of my readings for this month and my fan fiction puppet theater. Yes, this is going to be the second to the last night that I'm going to be doing this, and then I will be re-upping again in June, or potentially the last week in May. I haven't decided yet. There's something going on at the very beginning of June, so maybe the last month of May I'll be able to get a little bit of reading in. But for now, I think I'm going to do read the disclaimer real quick before we get into the rest of the story for tonight. Oh, and also, you can probably see her in there. Cinderella is going to be making an appearance tonight. I thought I'd point her out now because she actually shows up later, but I'll have to move over so you can see the second half of the scene behind me. Anyway, this is a work of fan fiction using characters from various fairy tale, TV, and film sources, including The House of Mouse. You'll know the reference immediately when you hear it, trust me. I began writing these shorts in order to preserve the tales that my best friend Shannon and I told to each other when we were children and consistently getting Disney dolls for our birthdays and Christmases. That being said, I claim no ownership over certain plots, characters, or bits of world I am borrowing to tell these stories. The situations cobbled herein are meant to entertain and are not part of any official storyline, and you should not ascribe them to the original story or canon. No money is being made here. As previously stated, this is just for fun, and I hope you all get as much enjoyment out of me reading this as I have while writing it. Additionally, I'd like to thank the House of Mouse and a cast of several others for providing such a wealthy supply of fairy tale happy endings that I thoroughly enjoy destroying. We'll see that happen soon enough. I apologize to anyone out there whose favorite fairy tale is Cinderella. Anyway. Chapter 3 continued. The Ball and Cinderella. By the time the prince arrived back home, the whole kingdom was bustling about in preparation for the ball, which would be taking place the following evening. As soon as he was able, Charming made it a point to find his mother and father. He found them in the great hall, overseeing the decorating for the grand event. Careful to keep his temper in check, he bowed respectfully to each in turn before asking after the well-being of his siblings. His mother replied that they were all doing quite well. However, the second and third eldest, Philippe and Ferdinand, would be unable to attend tomorrow's festivities, as they were off in other parts of the country on adventures of their own, but that the three youngest would be there. Charming felt a twinge of jealousy for his brothers, who were still allowed to roam free while he was forced to return to attend a ridiculous social event. Before he could even stop himself, the prince blurted out that he had no interest in getting married, and couldn't they call off this preposterous ball? King Miliardo's mouth dropped open in shock, before his face began to turn red with anger. But the queen cut across him before he could say anything. She explained to her son that calling off such an event when they were so close was impossible. What would they tell their guests? Charming wanted to retort that he didn't care what they told them. He only cared that the whole affair be stopped at once. What he said, however, was that he would agree to this tragic circus on one condition: that should he fail to obtain a bride the following evening, that he should be allowed to find love in his own way, no matter how long it took. The king and queen exchanged a nervous glance, but ultimately agreed to their son's conditions. Feeling satisfied, and perhaps a bit smug, Charming bowed respectfully to both his parents before quitting the grand hall. I think I'll move over here. There we go. The following evening, the prince was dressed in his finest and escorted back to the grand hall and led to the dais, where he would await to receive every eligible young woman in the land. The very idea made him feel positively bored, but he resolved to withstand it as long as possible. As the chamberlain began his first round of introductions, the prince looked out at the crowd that was beginning to form. He could have sworn he saw his younger siblings milling about. Daring was already striking up conversations with young ladies and leading them to the dance floor, while Dexter hung back shyly, trying very hard to remain inconspicuous. Darling, on the other hand, caught her brother's eye and gave him a small smile and a reassuring wave. That gesture alone from his sweet sister seemed to embolden him, and Charming stood a little straighter as the throng of women grew. Hours seemed to pass as the seemingly never-ending parade of girls were introduced to his royal person. They would curtsy, he would bow, and repeat. At one point, Charming was forced to stifle a yawn as his eyes wandered aimlessly up to the balcony, where he could just make out the silhouettes of the king and queen. No doubt, they were silently urging him to pick someone. If not for his future bride, then at least someone to dance with. After all, Daring had danced with several of them already, and it wasn't even his ball. But Charming was determined to remain aloof. That all changed as soon as the clock struck the hour of 10. Chamberlain had just announced the daughters of one Lady Tremaine, when from across the sea of guests, Charming spotted someone he hadn't seen before and knew had not been introduced at all. Entranced by this vision of loveliness, the prince pushed between Drusilla and Anastasia Tremaine to make his way over to what must have surely been a princess from some far-off country. For never in his life had he ever seen such a delicately made gown. When at last he was near enough to touch her, Charming reached out and gently caressed her hand. Startled, the beautiful princess turned around and smiled shyly at him. Stunned by her beauty, the prince almost forgot himself, and the bow he gave to her made him feel as if he had never done one before in his life. A delicate blush crept up the princess's cheeks, and she curtsied awkwardly. Charmed beyond words, the prince once again took her hand and kissed it reverently. The princess giggled, and her blush deepened. Charming asked her to dance, and she accepted breathlessly. The band struck up a waltz, and the prince and princess began to dance. As the two glided around the floor, Charming began to ask the beautiful girl in his arms all sorts of questions. Why hadn't he seen her at the palace before? Where did she come from? Who were her parents? Did she think it was possible to meet someone and know right away that they were the one? To each of these questions, the girl only smiled, but said that she did think it was possible to see a person and know instantly that they were meant to be. They drifted away from the hall and wandered into the garden. The moon was full and bright overhead and shone gloriously in each fountain and stream they passed. Time seemed to stand still as their dance came to an end, and they strode next to one another in a companionable silence. Finally, on a balcony, Charming leaned forward to steal a kiss from this stunning creature, and he saw her flush return as she closed her eyes to accept. Then the clock struck the hour of midnight. The girl pulled away from him with a start before their lips could touch. She was suddenly flustered as she remarked that she didn't realize that it was getting so late. The hour of midnight had come, and she must leave at once. Alarmed, Charming seized her hand and begged her to stay, but she only stammered an excuse about not having met the prince yet. He opened his mouth to reply that he was the prince, when the clock struck again, and with a frightened gasp, the girl called out a hasty goodbye before gathering up the folds of her glittering gown and ran. Shocked beyond belief that any maiden would run from him, the prince gave chase, but somehow she seemed to fly faster than he was able to follow. At the castle doors he lost her completely, vanished as if by magic. He gazed out forlornly at the empty staircase and saw, what was that? Something glittered at the bottom of the last stair. Curious, the prince descended the staircase and saw what it was, a single, dainty glass shoe. He picked it up, and as he did, a resolve he hadn't known he could feel took hold of him. That girl, whoever she had been, had left this behind, and come hell or high water, he would find her. Even if he had to try this slipper on every girl in the kingdom, he would do whatever it took to make her his. The following morning, the king and queen came to their son's room. Marie noted that he hadn't slept or eaten anything since the previous evening, and urged him to do so. But Charming refused. Today he was going out to look for the girl of his dreams, and that was final. The queen wanted to protest further, but the king patted her hand gently and said that if he was determined to find her, there was nothing they could say that would dissuade him. Reluctantly, the queen acquiesced. Charming thanked them for their understanding, and an hour later horses had been saddled and Captain Laurent had been summoned, and together he and the prince began their daunting search for the girl whose foot fit the tiny shoe. Minutes turned into hours, which eventually turned into days, and by the time the two men had been received into the house of Lady Tremaine, both were exhausted beyond description. When the lady of the house presented her two young daughters to his royal person, Charming noted that Captain Laurent had to repress a shudder, as both girls were possessed of a homeliness that belied their pedigree. Nevertheless, he presented the glass slipper to be tried on, and watched with nervous anticipation as each girl insisted that the shoe belonged to her. But with each subsequent try, the slipper stubbornly refused to fit either girl, their feet being too large and unsightly. Relieved, the prince was more than eager to leave, when, suddenly, Captain Laurent spoke up and asked if there were any other young women in the house. Lady Tremaine's lips curled almost imperceptibly as she replied that no, there were no other women of importance in the house. Charming nodded his thanks to her and turned to go, when from the top of the stairs a sweet voice called out, asking if she could also try the slipper on. The prince turned and saw a mousy-haired scullery maid descending the steps, and his heart gave a leap. Lady Tremaine and her daughters began to protest at great length, calling her imaginative, an impossible kitchen wench, and a foolish and delusional child. But the prince would hear none of their objections, as Captain Laurent led the young woman to a chair, and the glass slipper was produced. The captain of the guard slid it onto her foot, and it fit perfectly. Seeing this, the two other girls began to wail and cry, while their mother turned a deep shade of puce. But the prince neither heard or saw them as he gazed lovingly at his bride-to-be. As he took her hand and finally asked her name, she blushed demurely as she replied, "Cinderella." The prince smiled, and hand in hand the two returned to the castle, where they were married in a bright celebration that was felt throughout the entire kingdom. Indeed, the king said he hadn't known he could feel such joy, a joy so pure it rivaled all else. And somewhere, deep in the Black Forest, someone was listening. And that is the story so far, coming close to that foreshadowing. Hopefully, if you guys have watched previous videos, you might be able to guess what's coming. Maybe. Possibly. I don't want it to be too easy for you guys to figure out. So, as always, if anyone has any questions about the story so far, you can feel free to pop it up in the chat. Or when the live is concluded, you can also just pop them up in the comments. I'm very active here on my art page. I will answer any and all. Also, I only have one copy left of Lamentations of the Wood, the book that I wrote several years ago. I sent out one of second to last this week. So one left. Thank you guys so much to everyone who purchased a copy. It means a lot to me. It used to be up on Amazon and Lulu, but there was a circumstance that caused me to take it down. But eventually, potentially, I will put it back up. So if people are more into Kindles and things like that, you can purchase it that way, but I still have to think about it because I took it down for reasons that were nearly beyond my control. So with that being said, I think that should do it for the evening. Thank you guys so much for joining me. It means a lot. I will be reading tomorrow night. I think another long chunk of story will be coming. Hopefully, you guys, I still need to finish it. You see how well I am. I procrastinate, but I need to finish it. So hopefully, well tomorrow, so I'll be able to read you guys the rest, and then I'll be taking a break for a month, so I can write more. So I can have something to read to you guys, because I get a lot of enjoyment out of the tiny puppet theater here, and having you guys watch these. It is a lot of fun. I do enjoy it. And my dolls enjoy it too, because they get to get taken out of the box and be played with. So that's fun for me. And them. They appreciate. My little friends. They appreciate. So anyway, that will conclude for this evening. Be safe. I love you guys. And if you can, join me tomorrow night.